Laws are supposed to be the instruction manual for civilization, a rational guide for things like traffic and taxes. But what happens when the co-author of that manual is an all-powerful, unseen deity with very specific opinions on everything? You get a world where a desert can be a criminal offense, and the best legal defense for murder is simply knowing how to read. We are about to explore the 50 most baffling and brilliant laws ever inspired by a higher power. 1. Ever wonder why in old black and white movies married couples slept in separate twin beds? The answer is religious censorship. For over 30 years, every major Hollywood film was governed by the Hays Code, a set of brutally strict moral guidelines written and enforced by conservative Catholics. The code forbade everything from showing a toilet to allowing criminals to go unpunished. It demanded that all depictions of passion be kept within the bounds of decency. The result was a legally enforced nationwide illusion of a perfectly chaste world, dictated by a religious committee in Hollywood. 2. The next time you see a hockey coach in Massachusetts, face contorted and spittle flying as he screams at a referee, remember this: he's not just a bad sport, he's a sinner in the eyes of the law. A centuries-old Puritan blue law, still technically on the books, forbids cursing at a sports official. It's a direct holdover from an era when blasphemy was a public menace. That very modern, vein-popping rage is, by a dusty legal technicality, an offense against both the referee and God himself. 3. For centuries, the preferred method of justice in medieval Europe was trial by ordeal. The logic was simple. God would not allow an innocent person to suffer. So, to prove your innocence, you might be forced to carry a bar of red-hot iron for 10 paces or pluck a stone from a cauldron of boiling water. The court would then bandage your hand and check it 3 days later. If it was healing cleanly, it was a miracle. God had declared you innocent. If it was festering and infected, you were guilty. It was a legal system based entirely on divine intervention and a complete ignorance of how bacteria works. 4. Imagine a medieval thief, covered in mud and blood, sprinting through crowded city streets with the law just steps behind. He sees a church, throws open the heavy doors, and collapses at the altar. And just like that, he's safe. For centuries, the law of sanctuary was a real and powerful legal principle across Europe. Based on the idea that a holy place was God's direct jurisdiction, a fugitive who reached a church was legally untouchable by secular authorities. They could stay for up to 40 days, a bizarre legal timeout where a murderer could be living next door to a monastery protected by a divine loophole. 5. For centuries in England, the justice system had a built-in get-out-of-jail-free card, and it was powered by religion. It was called the benefit of clergy. Originally, it meant that if you were a priest or monk, you could avoid execution by being tried in a lenient church court. But the loophole expanded. The test to prove you were clergy was simple. Could you read a passage from the Bible? Soon, any common criminal who could read, or had memorized the right passage, could claim the benefit. The designated test was always Psalm 51:1, which became famously known as the neck verse, because the ability to read it could literally save your neck from the hangman's noose. It was the most high-stakes reading test in history. 6. In Saudi Arabia, the government employs literal, state-sanctioned witch hunters. It's not a joke. The official anti-witchcraft unit, operating under the religious police, actively investigates and prosecutes individuals accused of sorcery, fortune-telling, or casting spells. Crimes that are punishable by death. This isn't a relic of the past. These are modern-day witch trials based on a strict interpretation of Islamic law. 7. Let's review the qualifications for public office in the state of Tennessee. The state constitution explicitly bars anyone who has ever participated in a duel. Sensible enough. But it also permanently disqualifies any person who denies the being of God. Think about what that means. It creates a bizarre moral hierarchy where being a God-fearing citizen who settles political disputes with pistols at dawn is constitutionally preferable to being a peaceful, law-abiding atheist. 8. Imagine being on trial for theft in medieval England. Your defense? You bring 12 of your friends to court not to provide an alibi, but simply to swear on the Bible that they think you're a good, honest person. This was a real legal strategy called the wager of law. If you could find enough oath helpers to vouch for your character, you were declared innocent, regardless of the evidence. It was a justice system based not on facts, but on your social standing and the perceived piety of your friends. 9. In the 1830s, America was swept by a wave of religious fervor and health fanaticism, led by a Presbyterian minister named Sylvester Graham. He believed that spicy food, meat, and basically anything enjoyable led to impure thoughts and moral decay. His solution? A bland, whole wheat cracker he invented to curb desire and promote piety. His followers, known as Grahamites, were so influential that his dietary philosophy shaped public policy and health trends for decades. That's right, the graham cracker, the key ingredient in a s'more, was born from a religious crusade to make food so boring it would literally save your soul. 10. Until late 2018, it was a crime to commit blasphemy in Ireland. And this wasn't some dusty, forgotten text from the 1600s. The law was actually updated and reinforced in 2009, making it illegal to publish or say anything grossly abusive about sacred matters. For a while, this put a modern Western European nation in a very strange club. Thankfully, the Irish people voted overwhelmingly in a referendum to finally scrap it, deciding their society was robust enough to handle a few bad jokes. 11. In Michigan, if your marriage is on the rocks and you have an affair, your angry spouse has a nuclear option. They can call the district attorney. Because in Michigan, adultery isn't just a private mistake, it's a felony. This isn't some dusty, forgotten law. It is the 10 Commandments photocopied directly into the state's criminal code, complete with the threat of a 4-year prison sentence. While it's almost never prosecuted, it remains a terrifying legal ghost, a reminder that in some corners of the law, a personal betrayal is still considered a full-blown crime against the state. 12. The Puritans who founded New England were so terrified of fun, they basically made God the president of their homeowners association. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony, sumptuary laws made it illegal to have any flair whatsoever. We're talking gold buttons, silk ribbons, lace, and even stylishly slashed sleeves. The goal was to legally enforce humility by making everyone dress like a sad, beige rectangle. It was a society where a colorful hat wasn't just in poor taste. It was a criminal act of rebellion against a legally mandated blandness. 13. Imagine a law that made being ugly a crime. For nearly a century, from the 1860s to the 1970s, this was a reality in major American cities. So-called ugly laws made it illegal for any person who was diseased, maimed, or in any way deformed to appear in public. The horrifying justification was tangled in a religious sentiment that saw physical imperfection as a sign of sin or a divine curse. It was the state legally sanitizing its sidewalks of anyone who didn't fit a narrow, pious, and cruel definition of normal. Should a society ever have the right to legislate what is considered beautiful? 14. The movie Footloose wasn't a Hollywood exaggeration. It was a documentary for hundreds of American towns. For decades, especially in the Bible Belt, public dancing was outright illegal. These weren't just social taboos, they were actual ordinances enforced by police. Conservative Christian leaders saw dancing as a rhythmic, satanic pipeline directly to lust, moral collapse, and eternal damnation. The fact that moving your hips to a beat was a sin so profound it required a law and a punishment is a testament to how seriously some people took their fun-hating. 15. Look up the scold's bridle. It's a cold iron cage locked over the head, with a sharpened metal plate that forced the tongue down, making speech impossible. This wasn't a torture device for captured spies. It was a legally sanctioned punishment in England and its colonies for women accused of gossiping, nagging, or simply speaking out of turn. The justification was rooted in a rigid, religious interpretation of female silence and submission. It is one of the most brutal examples in history of turning a Bible verse into an instrument of public torture. 16. Why does McDonald's, a restaurant that built its empire on beef burgers, sell a fish sandwich? The answer is the Catholic Church. In the early 1960s, a franchise owner in a heavily Catholic neighborhood of Cincinnati was facing financial ruin. He realized his sales cratered every single Friday because his customers were observing the Catholic tradition of abstaining from meat. To save his business, he invented a non-meat alternative, the Filet-O-Fish. It became so popular that it went national, forever changing the fast food landscape. It's a perfect, greasy example of how a centuries-old religious doctrine from the Vatican directly forced the hand of a modern, multi-billion-dollar corporation. 17. In 2001, the legal system of Maine was forced to confront a question of earth-shattering theological importance. What is a donut? The state's ancient blue laws, designed to enforce the Christian Sabbath by closing businesses, were used to fine a shop called the Holy Donut for operating on a Sunday. The owner fought back, brilliantly arguing his donuts were a form of bread, and bakeries were exempt. The state was then forced to spend taxpayer money to debate the fundamental legal and spiritual nature of a pastry. A battle over faith, freedom, and fried dough. 18. The first major war on Christmas in America was waged by Christians. In 1659, the Puritans running the Massachusetts Bay Colony officially banned the celebration of Christmas. They saw it as a decadent, pagan-infested holiday with no biblical justification, just sinful feasting and drinking. If you were caught having a holly jolly time, you were fined 5 shillings. For over 20 years, celebrating Christmas in Boston was a literal crime, proving that one generation's sacred tradition is another's illegal party. 19. In 15th century Europe, a pig could be arrested, put on trial for taking a human life, given a lawyer, and sentenced to death by a judge. This actually happened many times. For centuries, animals were subjected to formal legal trials in church-run courts. The bizarre theological logic was that since all creatures were part of God's creation, they were all subject to God's law. So if a pig caused the death of a person or a swarm of beetles destroyed a crop, they could be held legally accountable. It is the most absurd and yet strangely logical application of religious law imaginable. 20. In colonial Virginia, the government cared about your immortal soul. It cared so much that skipping church on Sunday was illegal. This wasn't a friendly suggestion. It was a state-enforced mandate. The fine for your first offense was 50 pounds of tobacco, a small fortune back then. The penalties got worse if you were a repeat offender. The state and the church were one and the same, meaning your attendance in the pews was a civic duty, right alongside paying your taxes. What's one thing you believe should be illegal today, but isn't? 21. In modern, secular Germany, if you are officially registered as a Catholic or Protestant, the government will automatically deduct an 8 to 9% church tax directly from your paycheck. It is ruthlessly efficient. The only way to stop paying is to make an official appointment at a government office and formally declare that you are renouncing your faith. This has led to the bizarre situation where people are forced to break up with God via a state bureaucrat just to get a raise. 22. What if the government declared your favorite holiday dessert a criminal offense? In 17th century England, this was no joke. When Oliver Cromwell and his Puritans took power, they waged the original War on Christmas, banning celebrations they saw as sinfully decadent and, even worse, Catholic. Their biggest target was the mince pie. It wasn't just a tasty treat. To the Puritans, it was idolatry in a crust, a symbol of the very Christ's Mass they despised. For over a decade, eating a mince pie on Christmas was a genuine act of rebellion. It was a time when being jolly was illegal, and a pastry could make you a political dissident. 23. Imagine it's a beautiful sunny Sunday in Switzerland. You decide it's the perfect day to finally mow your lawn, hang your laundry out to dry, or maybe even wash your car. Congratulations, you may have just broken the law. In many parts of Switzerland, strict rest day laws, rooted in the concept of the Christian Sabbath, forbid any loud or disruptive activities on Sunday. This is the ultimate passive-aggressive religious law, a legally mandated silence enforced not by a sermon, but by the threat of a hefty fine from your annoyed neighbors. 24. Let's turn to the Old Testament's surprisingly detailed rules on family life. According to the book of Deuteronomy, if a man died without a son, his brother was legally obligated to marry the childless widow to continue the family line. This is known as levirate marriage. And if the brother refused, the law prescribed a public ceremony where the widow would confront him, take off his sandal, and spit in his face. It was a divinely sanctioned ritual of humiliation, all because he wouldn't marry his sister-in-law. 25. For centuries, kings and queens had the ultimate legal cheat code, the divine right of kings. This wasn't just a fancy title. It was a deeply serious legal and religious doctrine that stated a monarch was chosen directly by God and was therefore accountable only to God. It meant the king's word literally was the law. If you defied the king, you weren't just committing treason against the state. You were committing blasphemy against God himself. It's the most powerful law ever conceived because it makes the ruler and the deity one and the same. 26. You've seen it in 1,000 movies. A witness places their hand on a Bible and swears to tell the truth. But have you ever stopped to think how utterly bizarre that is? It's the secular legal system admitting it has no real way to guarantee you're not lying, so it outsources the job to a higher power. The unspoken threat isn't just perjury charges from the state, it's the fear of eternal damnation from God for breaking an oath made on his holy book. It's a legal strategy that relies entirely on the defendant's fear of the afterlife. 27. In Iceland, progress sometimes has to yield to folklore. Multi-million-dollar construction projects, from highways to power plants, have been rerouted or halted entirely to avoid disturbing rocks, believed to be the homes of the Huldufolk, or hidden people. These aren't just quaint fairy tales. These pre-Christian beliefs are so deeply embedded in the national psyche that they carry real legal weight in planning disputes. Courts have recognized the cultural and spiritual significance of these sites, forcing engineers to negotiate with advocates for their unseen elven constituents. At what point should a government stop accommodating spiritual beliefs and just build the road? Where do you draw the line? 28. In the 13th century, Pope Gregory IX issued a papal bull, a formal declaration with the weight of holy law. His subject? Cats. He declared that black cats were instruments of Satan and were directly associated with witchcraft. This wasn't just a casual opinion. It kicked off centuries of feline persecution across Europe. While historians debate the direct impact, the timing is chilling. By decimating the continent's primary rat catcher, this divinely inspired war on cats likely made the subsequent Black Death, spread by fleas on rats, catastrophically worse. 29. In observance of Jewish law forbidding the use of electrical switches on the Sabbath, many buildings in Israel and worldwide use a Sabbath elevator. On Saturdays, it enters a special mode, stopping automatically on every single floor. You don't push any buttons, you just get on and wait. It's a brilliant, if excruciatingly slow, high-tech solution to an ancient religious rule, turning a 40-story building into a weekly, automated lesson in patience. Sporties, I'm 30. It's a Sunday afternoon, your main day off, and you finally decided it's time to buy a new car. You head to the dealership, ready to haggle. But the lot is empty, the doors are locked, and a strange silence hangs in the air. Why? Because in a surprising number of American states, including Texas, Illinois, and New Jersey, it is completely illegal for car dealerships to be open on Sunday. This isn't for an industry-wide day of rest. It is the ghost of old Christian blue laws haunting modern commerce. You can buy a boat, a house, or a jet ski, but the American automobile industry is forced to take a holy day off. 31. Of all the divine commands in history, one of the most bafflingly specific is found in the book of Leviticus. It strictly forbids wearing a garment woven from two different materials, specifically wool and linen. This wasn't a suggestion for better fashion. For centuries, it was considered a serious transgression against God. It's the ultimate proof that the divine is concerned with everything from your eternal soul all the way down to your laundry tag. It makes God the original and most demanding fashion critic in the universe. 32. The American Prohibition of the 1920s wasn't just a failed social experiment. It was a full-blown holy war. The movement to ban alcohol was driven by a fiery coalition of Protestant religious groups who saw liquor not as a beverage, but as a moral poison, the literal devil's brew. They believed that to make America a truly godly nation, they had to legally slay the demon of drink. So they didn't just pass a law, they amended the Constitution itself, turning a temperance sermon into the supreme law of the land and unleashing a decade of crime and chaos in the name of piety. 33. In many parts of India, the cow is legally entitled to better treatment than some people. Based on Hindu beliefs that view the cow as a sacred animal, cow slaughter is illegal in most states, and harming one can lead to prison sentences. This has created a surreal modern reality where millions of stray cattle wander freely, protected by law. They cause epic traffic jams in bustling cities, casually stroll through hospital corridors, and have a legal right-of-way over everyone, from pedestrians to ambulances. It's a nationwide, legally enforced traffic jam of faith. 34. In 1925, a high school teacher in Tennessee named John Scopes was arrested. His crime? Teaching evolution. The resulting Scopes monkey trial became a national spectacle. It wasn't just a legal case, it was a public trial of science itself, with a celebrity lawyer arguing for the Bible and the ACLU arguing for Darwin. The prosecution's case was rooted in a state law that made teaching any theory that denies the biblical story of creation a crime. It was a 20th century heresy trial, putting the Book of Genesis and the biology textbook in a fight to the death in a court of law. 35. Imagine sitting in a sleek modern restaurant in Utah, ordering a martini. You hear the clinking of ice, the slosh of gin, but you see nothing. Until 2017, this was reality. Due to the state's dominant Mormon culture and its views on alcohol, a bizarre law required bartenders to work behind a 7-foot-high barrier known as the Zion Curtain. The official purpose was to shield children from the glamour of mixology. The result was your drink appearing through a small hole in a wall, as if passed to you by a shy but very helpful ghost. It was legislative performance art, solving a problem that never existed. 36. The infamous "No Irish Need Apply" signs that littered American cities in the 19th century were not just about nationality, they were about religion. This was the result of a wave of violent anti-Catholic sentiment. To the dominant Protestant culture, Irish immigrants weren't just poor and foreign, they were followers of a false religion, loyal to a pope they saw as a foreign tyrant. This legally condoned discrimination was fueled by theological arguments, turning a dispute over the nature of communion into a justification for denying someone a job and a home. 37. Michigan has an old law that makes it a crime to use profane language in the presence of a woman. This is a perfect legal fossil from a 19th century Christian worldview where women were seen as delicate creatures who might faint at the sound of a curse word. Imagine trying to enforce this law today at a football game or a Taylor Swift concert. 38. In Pakistan, saying the wrong thing about religion can carry the ultimate penalty, and the state itself will enforce it. The country's blasphemy laws, among the strictest in the world, make it a capital crime to insult Islam. But the law is so vaguely worded that it has become a terrifying weapon for settling personal scores. A simple accusation, with or without proof, can lead to mob violence and a death sentence from the courts. It's a chilling example of a religious law creating a system where a mere allegation can be more powerful than a bullet. 39. For the Puritans of early America, a simple deck of playing cards wasn't a game. It was the devil's picture book. They believed the cards were a tool of pure evil and witchcraft. Their reasoning was incredibly specific. The four suits represented the four great monarchies that persecuted Christians, while the kings, queens, and jacks were idols. Playing cards were banned in many Puritan communities as a gateway to gambling, idleness, and damnation. It's a perfect example of a mindset so pious it could find satanic conspiracies in a game of solitaire. 40. In 1494, the two naval superpowers of the day, Spain and Portugal, had a problem. They kept bumping into each other's newly discovered lands. So they went to the only authority they believed could solve it, the Pope. And solve it he did. In the Treaty of Tordesillas, the Pope literally drew a line down the middle of a world map. Everything to the west of the line was declared the property of Spain, and everything to the east belonged to Portugal. It is, without a doubt, the single most arrogant and audacious act of religious law in history. Two countries and one pope, dividing the entire planet between them. 41. You're driving through the peaceful countryside of Pennsylvania when you see it. A simple, horse-drawn buggy. And on the back is a bright orange, legally mandated reflective triangle, a symbol of a fascinating legal collision. The Amish ordinal, their unwritten religious law, commands them to live a simple life, separate from the modern world. But state traffic laws demand safety reflectors. The result is a compromise brokered between two completely different centuries. A 19th century vehicle, compliant with 21st century safety regulations, all because of a 17th century religious schism. 42. Imagine your credit card statement wasn't just expensive, imagine it was a one-way ticket to hell. For centuries in Christian Europe, that's exactly what it was. The church outlawed the act of charging any interest on a loan, a practice it condemned as the mortal sin of usury. This wasn't a minor rule. It put bankers on the same moral level as murderers and heretics. This single religious doctrine put the entire concept of modern finance on ice for 1,000 years. So where did kings and merchants go when they desperately needed capital? They turned to Jewish communities, whose own religious laws didn't forbid the practice. This forced a bizarre and dangerous paradox where the very people who fueled Europe's economies were simultaneously damned as sinners for the service they provided. 43. If you want to make a living reading tarot cards, gazing into a crystal ball, or reading palms in New York, you are technically a criminal. Laws banning fortune-telling for profit are still on the books in many places, and they are direct descendants of biblical prohibitions against divination. While mostly used today to prosecute obvious scams, their origin is purely religious. It's as if the state is accidentally enforcing God's exclusive intellectual property rights over the future. They're not saying psychics aren't real, just that they can't charge for their services. 44. During the Spanish Inquisition, the authorities developed a truly diabolical legal test for identifying secret Jews and Muslims who had been forcibly converted to Christianity. Inquisitors would offer a suspect a piece of pork or a bowl of stew, cooked with pork. To a genuine Christian convert, it was just a meal. But to someone secretly holding to their faith, eating the forbidden meat was a profound violation. Accepting the food meant betraying their God, but refusing it meant torture and execution. It was a theological trap, where your lunch order could become your death sentence. 45. Scientology's most dedicated members, the Sea Org, are required to sign a unique and binding legal document, a 1 billion-year employment contract. This isn't a metaphor or a typo. The contract legally binds them to the organization for 1 billion years, across all their future lifetimes. While its legal enforceability in a secular court is highly questionable, its power as an instrument of psychological and spiritual commitment is absolute. It is, without a doubt, the most ambitious and religiously audacious employment agreement in human history. 46. For centuries, the Catholic Church held trials and issued official, legal excommunications against insects. If a swarm of locusts or beetles was destroying crops, the Church wouldn't just pray. They would appoint a lawyer for the insects, hold a formal trial in an ecclesiastical court, and, if the bugs were found guilty, they would be formally cursed and ordered to leave the area under penalty of eternal damnation. It was a bizarre fusion of pest control and holy war. 47. What's the only country in the world where Latin is an official language and the ATMs offer instructions in it? The Vatican. But it's not just a historical curiosity. For over 1,000 years, the Papal States were a major political and military power in Italy. The Pope wasn't just a spiritual leader. He was a king who commanded armies, collected taxes, and ran a police force that could arrest and execute people. It was a time when the head of the church could order you to be put to death, and it was all perfectly legal. 48. In the early days of Islam, a divine revelation temporarily forbade the Prophet Muhammad and his followers from facing Jerusalem during prayer, commanding them to face the Kaaba in Mecca instead. This created a fascinating architectural problem. Mosques that had already been built facing Jerusalem suddenly had to be reoriented. One of the oldest mosques in Medina is famously called the Masjid al-Qiblatain, or Mosque of the Two Qiblas, because it contains one prayer niche facing Jerusalem and a second, newer one facing Mecca, a building forever frozen in the middle of obeying a direct, divine legal update. 49. In 1844, a preacher named William Miller convinced up to 1 million followers that he had used biblical prophecy to calculate the exact date of the end of the world. October 22nd. Believers sold their homes, quit their jobs, and gathered on hillsides in white robes to await the return of Christ. When the sun came up on October 23rd, their devastation was absolute. This moment became known as the Great Disappointment. But what's truly amazing is that this failed prophecy didn't end the movement. It created new ones, including the Seventh-day Adventist Church, born from the legal and theological ashes of a doomsday that never came. All right, we've covered 49 points, and only one grand finale remains. But before we get to number 50, it's time for the final verdict. In our opinion, the award for the most unbelievable rule from today's list goes to the ugly laws. Simply because they weren't ancient or medieval, they were enforced in modern American cities. They codified prejudice into law and turned a simple walk down the sidewalk into a stage for state-sanctioned cruelty. Do you agree with our verdict? Or did another point deserve this dubious honor? Let us know in the comments what you think. And now, our final number. 50. In the year 897, Pope Stephen VI held the most insane trial in the history of the world. His defendant was Pope Formosus, his immediate predecessor. The problem was, Formosus had been dead for 9 months. This was not a deterrent. Stephen had the decaying corpse of his rival dug up, dressed in full papal robes, and propped up on a throne in the courtroom to face charges. A young deacon was appointed to speak for the corpse. Stephen screamed questions at the dead body, found it guilty, and then declared all of its acts as Pope null and void. As a final punishment, he had the 3 fingers Formosus used for blessings hacked off, and had his body thrown into the Tiber River. It is the absolute pinnacle of what happens when religious authority, absolute power, and a personal grudge combine to create a law that is not just weird, but grotesquely insane. So, from prosecuting corpses to criminalizing desserts, it's clear that history's rulebook is the most absurd document ever written. What's truly crazy is that we only scratched the surface. There are thousands of these laws still out there. So, we're turning it over to you. What is the weirdest local or old law from your hometown or country that we completely missed? The best ones will get pinned. And if you want to keep exploring the madness that built our world, subscribe and hit the bell. You won't regret it.